The next session we talked about the need to make sure our clinical colleagues are sort of comfortable with some of the fundamentals around digital clinical measures. The next piece that we wanted to bring to the jigsaw was thinking about, for all of the passion around these tools, for all of their promise, unless we have executive support, we are going to struggle a little bit to have the resources, to have the time, to have the buy-in in order to make sure we realize that promise of all of these digital clinical measures we're working so hard to create. And I'm going to ask Jean to share just a little bit of insights into the extraordinary resources that this next panel created as part of the work on the pharma exec dossier. What you'll see here is that this team leaned into not only a benefits matrix so that we can appropriately hand over to decision makers what's the value in developing and deploying these digital clinical measures, asking and answering that question of what's in it for me. I was also incredibly proud of this team because not only did they think about the what's in it for me questions, they highlighted some of the other key issues that are perhaps impeding successful progress of digital clinical measures. This team made the case for including the patient perspective. They highlighted regulatory proof points to try and address the issue of regulatory uncertainty. They created a quick start guide, a micro playbook, teasing out slides from the playbook that are most important to executives and key decision makers. And finally, making the case that this is needed in this day and age to maintain a competitive advantage. All of these resources are available to you. I'm going to ask my colleague Jean to drop the link into the chat. And with that, we're going to go ahead and introduce you all to the extraordinary team that were very ambitious and created all of these resources for you. And the way we're going to do this was a big team. This was a bold team. So just to orient folks to the session, we're not going to do separate introductions, but rather I'm going to call on each of you to introduce yourself to everyone on the line and share a little bit about what you've been working on. And David, I'm going to see if I can spotlight you here, and I'll bring everyone up to the stage properly in just a second. David, from the start, before we even started this tour, you were telling me we need to make the case to our executive decision makers. I don't care if we have the playbook, if we don't have the resources to action it. Tell us a little bit more around, well, first of all, introduce yourself to everyone, and then tell us, after COVID, to some people, it might be, how is this not a no-brainer? How have we not already achieved this support? Tell us why we needed to even develop this benefits matrix in the first place.
Okay, thanks, Jen. So I'm David Caouette. I'm Executive Director and Head of the Digital Data Science team and the FIRE Lab, the Pfizer Innovation Research Lab at Pfizer, and the Digital Medicine Translational Imaging Group. So Jen, when I first heard of the tour of duty, my first thought was that it would be great to connect with all these fellow experts and try to move the needle towards adoption of digital endpoints in clinical studies. And what prompted that is that whenever we talk to asset teams about deploying digital endpoints in their studies, they always have the same questions. They have a defined budget and a defined timeline. They say, what's it going to cost? Is it going to delay me? And what are the benefits to my team, right? We always face this, and we want to have some good answers for these teams so that they can justify putting that in their studies. So those are fair questions, and I thought if we could build a dossier that would contain some success stories, some examples when teams have deployed digital endpoints in a study and the benefits that they've gotten from it, whether to make the study more patient-centric, to recruit faster, to be more compliant and the retention is higher. If we can put together this dossier and showcase that to the executives so that they can see, yeah, I clearly see that there's a benefit there and I need to put that in my study. So that's something that's been missing, and I thought this team could put their heads together and build this. Now you mentioned COVID. Since the pandemic began, more and more emphasis has been placed on remote monitoring and decentralized clinical trials. And for that, it seems like the digital endpoints are shifting a little bit from nice to have to something that's essential, something that's needed, because you need to get the participants and the patients wherever they are, right? And that's the perfect time for us to build that dossier and to use that to promote the use of these endpoints. So I think that what we need to do is to demonstrate how the digital endpoints, compare to the gold standards, to what the regulators, the decision makers are used to have confidence in their ability to representatively quantify change in human behaviors, something we want to measure. Can we measure those, and can we measure changes? And then can we define the value and benefits to all stakeholders, the patients, the prescribers, academia, pharma? And I felt that that's what the tour of duty and the playbook could very strongly, strive to achieve. So it's been a really pleasant experience being with all these experts for these last 6 months. And I think we've produced a huge amount of work that is going to be helpful to the field in general.
Fantastic. David, you articulated that really nicely. And I am equally hopeful that the resources will sort of help move the needle. And the collaboration on this, the cross sort of disciplinary engagement has been extraordinary, and so glad you were part of it. Chris Benko, I'm going to come to you next. You were a former pharma executive and you moved over to found your own digital measures company. So clearly this was not something you needed to be convinced to do. How do you sort of see positioning these digital clinical measures correctly, such that they're not just a flash in the pan, but they actually return sort of enduring strategic value back to a sort of drug development and all of the patients we're here to serve?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So yeah, I'm Chris Benko. I'm the CEO of Koneksa. I spent 20 years at Merck, and a significant chapter of that career was focused on the implementation of what I'll call traditional biomarkers into our operating model for drug development, molecular, imaging, fluid biomarkers. And I watched that adoption curve occur throughout that organization. And then 7 years ago, I had the opportunity to move into their corporate venture fund as an entrepreneur in residence to start Koneksa. The simple way I'll describe Koneksa is that we began basically as the bioanalytical lab to start to develop and validate digital measures, combined with a software and data platform and set of supporting services that allow us to deploy digital biomarkers and endpoints in clinical trials for new medicines in the pharma industry. So that's what we've been working at for the last 7 years. What's really neat about this chapter and working together in the playbook is that we're reunited with a lot of people that we've been working alongside, in many cases throughout that entire journey of the last 7 years, and other people that we've had the opportunity to work with more recently. And I think many of us can relate to the fact that when we first met, a lot of the work that we were doing was more likely to be exploratory endpoints, early analytical validation, and proof of concept, usability, feasibility testing. All of these things needed to happen as part of the adoption curve. But increasingly, these efforts are starting to read out. And I'm so encouraged by the number of people that are excited to publish together, to promote and share their data externally. And we had a lot of great discussions as part of this working group about how to share more of those success examples. And I think what we're going to start to see is that things are going to matriculate through this change curve, where we go from that early validation into increasing clinical validation and use of these measures to start to inform really meaningful decisions, like major investment decisions about how to prioritize new investments in new indications, and even thinking about totally novel endpoints that will be compelling to regulators and payers. That's not a journey that happens overnight, but I think that we're well through that curve of progress where we can start sharing a lot more with the community. The last thing I'll say on that is, and building on what David offered, COVID forced an acceleration of people's thinking of their self-assessed risk tolerance for what we need to do in terms of driving adoption more aggressively. We still haven't had an opportunity to see the readout of a lot of those efforts in terms of what they're going to be able to produce really meaningful and compelling data. And I'm excited to look forward over the next year or two as some of those studies report back and we're able to learn from them and figure out how to continue to evolve and scale the use of these tools across late stage clinical trials and across more therapeutic areas.
Chris, what I love about your comments is not only the positivity, but also sort of articulating that we're not just at a point where we're going to get adoption, but where we're going to get support at the highest levels with time and with dollars for doing this the right way, for doing this the scientific way. So that's really encouraging. And I think a real, as you said, a real sort of watershed moment for our field. And Chris, you and Koneksa were part of the OG Playbook team. So really delighted that you stayed on with us. It's been a pleasure, and just really glad you're here today. With that, I'm going to go, it's a Chris team here, a Chris Economist, so I'm going to come to you next. So your organization, physIQ, has just been tapped by a large pharma company, really to help make use of their digital data, right? Tell us a little bit more about how you pulled that off. How did you articulate those value propositions to your new partner, and sort of what are you excited about coming down the pike?
Thanks, Jen. So hi, everyone. My name is Chris Economist, Chief Commercial Officer at physIQ. Little background, we specialize in collecting continuous wearable sensor data on our platform. And then we develop and deploy clinically validated biomarkers on that platform to take the raw data and turn it into insight. And so the deal that Jen's referencing is the recent announcement where Janssen Pharmaceuticals has entered into a multi-year enterprise license agreement by which they want to use this platform to collect data across all of their clinical development as well as commercial activities. And I think, obviously this is really exciting for us, but I actually think it's also marks an exciting point, hopefully an inflection point for industry, whereby Janssen realized they had to move from a one-off approach to deploying sensors and trials, and really have the infrastructure in place in order to scale this across the enterprise. And so, as we look at near term and long term, I think one of the ways to think about this is at a very high level. There are two sets of stakeholders within these pharma companies that we're working with. You've got those folks who are responsible for efficiently collecting and managing data. So digital groups, IT groups, data science groups, clinical ops. And then you have those stakeholders who are really interested in the output of those data streams, namely the clinical leads within the different therapeutic areas, pharmacovigilance, et cetera. And so the challenge in front of them was, how do we do this more efficiently? How do we have a common infrastructure that allows us to deploy this at will across the different clinical development initiatives? And in that regard, having a platform that they knew was going to be able to provide quality data, consistent algorithm output, I think was really important for those folks who need to make sure that the trials run efficiently and that the quality of the data is up to snuff. And I think the exciting thing about going forward with all of this is that as we look at the other set of stakeholders, the clinical leads, the opportunity to generate and work with them to pull out more insight from these data streams. So, we have this opportunity now with wearable sensors to collect every breath, every heartbeat, every subtle movement. And the opportunity now to translate those data streams into meaningful output that they can use to move the needle on their clinical initiatives is really what we're going to be focusing on. Obviously, the work with DIME is essential with that. And then we look at how are we going to support specific challenges and problems that they have and what they're trying to solve. So, for example, how can we use wearable sensors to better identify patients who should be enrolled in a trial or who are higher probability of being a treatment responder? How do we use sensors to support safety monitoring and safety endpoints, particularly in a world of decentralized trials? And then lastly, how can we use these sensors and the data from these sensors to support novel efficacy endpoints? So, we've got the piece in place about the infrastructure to deploy these sensors. And now we're going to be working with them to identify how do we solve the specific clinical challenges they have within their TAs.
It had to happen at some point. Chris, fantastic remarks. Thank you. And I think what you've underscored is something that actually other Chris pushed us with really early on as we thought about what is the value in all of this. We need to not just isolate them to a single use case in a single trial. We need to figure out how these things return value to us across the board and over an extended timeline. Priyanka, you were also part of the OG Playbook team. You also, folks may not know this, you actually brought the initial idea to Andy. It was actually you two that sort of planted the seed, planted the kernel for doing all of this work. So first of all, I hope this is a great day for you. This is a phenomenal continuation of your initial idea. So congratulations. Congratulations also, MyoKardia has been purchased by BMS. And, you know, one of the things that I would hypothesize, I don't know, may have been on your mind is, you know, you have completed a really successful Maverick trial. You were able to include digital measures in that study. Can you tell, well, first of all, introduce yourself, and then can you tell us a little bit about what it took internally? How did you make the case? How did you get that support to use those digital endpoints?
Thanks so much, Jen. And it's really great to see all the enthusiasm for this work and great to see this grow from an idea to something that's really a major effort. So first, just to introduce myself, my name is Priyanka Agrawal. I'm a physician and internist by training and have been leading the digital health program at MyoKardia. And I'm also still clinically active at UCSF where I practice as a hospitalist. So, you know, I think the biggest question for these digital measures is always, you know, why are we implementing them and what are we really trying to achieve, and how is using a digital measure better than what's already done today? And I think those are the questions that have to be answered. I think without it, you know, you're left in the realm of, oh, this is interesting, this is the future, but it's a little bit so what? So, you know, when we were planning our trials at MyoKardia, our initial area of focus was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is an inherited cardiovascular disease. And when you talk to patients, the number one thing that you hear is just challenges walking in daily life and fatigue. And so when you hear that from patients again and again, it seems entirely reasonable to assume that a drug that's going to improve a patient's life is going to have an impact on their activities of daily living. So that was the major reason why we invested so heavily in accelerometry at MyoKardia. It was really, you know, listening to the patients and understanding what challenges do they have and realizing that, you know, these point in time measures in traditional clinical trials may not really adequately capture the span of improvement that we're seeing for patients. And so, you know, after we would meet patients who were on mavacamten, which is the drug we're developing, the first thing you'd hear is that you hear partners saying, oh, my wife can now walk 2 blocks. She couldn't do that before. And so, you know, we saw a lot of those same changes that physicians were hearing anecdotally in the study, that patients and their families were telling us, reflected in the accelerometry data that we collected in Maverick, which was really, really great to see. And so, you know, when I think about how do you convince others within the company, how do you convince executives, I think it has to go towards value and towards outcomes that wouldn't be achievable via traditional clinical measures. And I think if we really start there, that's really the best way of getting buy-in. I think that, you know, arguments around the future and, you know, where this is where the field is going, I think ultimately do this field a disservice. I think the value here is really that you are measuring something that you can't measure in a traditional clinical trial. You're going to understand patients better, and then that's going to help you make better decisions around where you're making investments internally within a company. So that's really where we, you know, founded our arguments. And, you know, I think anyone responds to that. And, you know, we don't want people to think about the value of digital measures any differently than they think about value in a clinical trial. And so we want to use the same value metrics and the same outcomes and, you know, really be hard about the science and hard about the methodology that we're using. And I think that's been something that we've talked about more broadly within this effort, is really having the rigor of really good science and showing the value for what we're doing.
Priyanka, I love that. It's been sort of the North Star here to make sure that while we've been trying to move quickly to put these resources out, we've maintained the scientific rigor. And, you know, thinking about digital clinical measures in the same way we think about everything else is really important. And I love when you describe this story, because you always talk about the patient first. And I think that that just characterizes how we do this well. Marissa, we've talked about the need to sort of perhaps manage up a little bit, pitch up a little bit to get that sort of executive cover and support to get this done. One of the other features has been sort of articulating the benefit to sort of colleagues who might sit more laterally, right? People that you need to come to the table as enthusiastic collaborators. Tell us how sort of you've negotiated this in the past and how some of these resources might be helpful as you do that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marissa Dockendorf. I'm a director in the Global Digital Analytics and Technologies Group at Merck. And part of my role is to help enable adoption, meaningful adoption of digital clinical measures and digital health technologies across our clinical drug development trials. And so, what I've noticed in my experience in terms of really helping drive adoption across the portfolio is that it's really important not to just take a top to bottom or bottom to top approach, but really both are really important. So it's important that you have the support of executive sponsors and senior leadership and really understanding, return on investment and the many potential benefits that some of the other panelists have outlined in terms of drug development and helping kind of better understand our compounds and our patients. But it's also important that you have the support of the clinical trial team because they're the ones that are really going to make it happen. And the reality is that some of these technologies are emerging and it might be a bit new for us. And so there's a lot of things and logistics and lots of different things that need to be worked out. And so it's really important that you have their support as well as we're sort of enabling our infrastructure to better accommodate these types of approaches. So you need both bottom up and top down support. And I think what's really great about this effort in terms of DIME and the Playbook is that you have tools that are targeted towards both audiences, towards several audiences. And so I think that, I, for one, I'm really looking forward to utilizing these tools that have been developed and helping with getting buy-in and sort of making the case, right, towards different audiences. So yeah, and it's been a pleasure to be part of this team. So thank you.
Marissa, it's been such a pleasure to have you. And I love how you describe that. It's not enough to have that sort of top to bottom or bottom to top. We have to bring everyone with us. And that's certainly emerging as a theme for today. I want to pivot a little bit. We've been talking a lot about sort of the value to decision makers, the value to your potential colleagues. One of the things I was really proud of this group was, it's not enough to articulate what's in it for me. We also wanted to serve up to those decision makers. What are the fundamental things that we need to make sure we don't allow ourselves to take our eye off? Bray, one of the things we did was sort of create some case examples for patient engagement. And first of all, I want to thank our Savvy colleagues. They were participants in this tour, but not this work stream, but yet still served up for us some tremendous examples. But what I find almost frustrating is why are we still talking about we need to do patient engagement? Like we've been banging this drum for a long time. We have compelling examples. What is it going to take for us to break through here?
Yeah. Thanks, Jen. And thanks to this group. Everybody was very committed to being patient-centered, and I really appreciate that effort. So I'm Bray Patrick Lake. I'm a senior director in the Strategic Partnerships Group at Evidation Health. We are a digital research and health engagement company. We specialize in using person-generated health data to better measure health in everyday life and also to motivate patients to action. So I've spent a lot of my career, one as a patient advocate and as a leader of a patient foundation who later got into trying to improve the clinical trials enterprise by integrating patient voice. So really since 2013, we have been stepping on the gas pedal to develop frameworks for patient-focused drug development. And then also 21st Century Cures Act, I think really helped us move forward with real-world evidence. But now, so back then we were kind of trying to change the culture and make it much more patient-centered, and we had the why. And then we had to get to the how. So we started putting out frameworks. And so we really put out a lot of things and a lot of tools around how to integrate patient voice in clinical trial design. And then we've got this whole blossom of digital tools and the digital health space with this new workforce. And at this point, it's kind of time to, to back up and get some new frameworks into place for digital clinical measures specifically. And so now we've got the tools, and some of them are also in the larger playbook around developing and selecting measures that matter to patients. And I really think we're kind of at this place of workflow adaptation. So we have the tools, we know that we should be doing it. We know now how to do it, but we have to get these tools, I think, into the workflow. And so if you take some of the things that are in this playbook, you can not only make the business case, because we also have economic models for patient engagement, and we can actually prove economically that this is the better approach, but we need to get this into really our scopes of work, our budgets, our timelines, and we need to make sure that people are accountable within the corporations that are actually, doing clinical development. And we have to really also ensure that we aren't just proliferating a bunch of measures that are not meaningful to patients. So if we step back and we really think about doing the work with patients, that's honestly not that hard. I think it's very rewarding. It's just a matter of making sure it's built into your processes. So we always need to start with, the meaningful aspects of health, get to the concepts of interest, and then, we can look at some novel endpoints. I think we can get past novel. Some of them aren't so novel, but we also really need to resist that temptation to grab things that other people have put in their clinical trials. So like MyoKardia, your activities of daily living, absolutely the right thing, but that might not be, that endpoint that was successful might not be the right one to pull into somebody else's clinical trial. We still need to go back and make sure that whatever measure, even if it was successful in a regulatory setting, is still meaningful to patients. So I would just encourage everybody to take these tools and make sure that you build this into your workflow.
Strong call to action, strong recommendation, and I love it, Bray. Thanks for everything you've done as part of this work. Jeremy, let's come to you next. Look, Actigraph has been doing this work for over a decade now, really one of the early movers and still sort of powerhouses in these digital measures. Chris talked a little bit about how things have sort of changed over, the past few years. Tell us about how you've experienced sort of the embrace or otherwise of digital clinical measures and how hopefully the playbook can catalyze next steps.
Yeah, thanks, Jen, and nice to see everybody. I'm Jeremy Wyatt, CEO of Actigraph, and we're here in Pensacola, Florida. Say hello to everybody from Florida today. But our mission is to bring life to digital data, and here at Actigraph, we're a medical grade digital biomarker company. We've been doing this a long time, as Jen said, and we're just very excited to collaborate with this team on bringing this to the next level. So, Jen, your question around, kind of where are we at and what needs to happen? We see this really a lot of confusion still in the industry, right? I mean, everybody's trying to figure out the best path forward. But I think we've spent so much time building a really strong foundation as part of the playbook, but even before the playbook. And so we've sort of seen the work that we've done over the past few months, bringing those things together to give us some clarity on how do we move forward with this. And COVID has given us a real good catalyst and timing on why and how we do this. So yeah, I think we've done a good job of putting those things together in the playbook. And so it gives us a roadmap, right, of what questions do we ask, what endpoints are available. I mean, Dime has over 200 on their site. What are those? How do we use them? It gives us clarity on how do the technical companies like Actigraph and the sponsors and CROs, how do we work together? What are the respective roles? Where should we be going? And it gives us clarity on how to continue to create these new endpoints that can be used to replace these really crude measures that are still out there incredibly. I mean, I think about Ray Dorsey and his speech a few years ago at the Digital Biomarker Summit, where he was just talking about how in Parkinson's, so many of these phase 3 studies fail to replicate the phase 2, and we end up spending millions of dollars, because we did a basic crude survey. And so, what we've got is an opportunity now to take, work together to define how to do that and move it forward. And the work we've done with the tour of duty has given a lot of clarity for executives to understand where are the opportunities to reduce risk, where are the opportunities to improve ROI, where can we look for the maximum benefit, and how do we apply these things. And so, as Amy said earlier, the nice thing is we don't have to wait on the answers to come from the regulatory agencies. We can, as a collaborative team, work together to begin to move those forward now. We've got plenty of places to start and plenty of places to go. So I'm just super excited about the work we've done. And, I hope we can begin to see more momentum grow now that this is out in front of everyone.
Jeremy, it's been such a pleasure to work with you on this. And I agree that we've made some really great progress here for the right decision makers. Virginia, one of the things that we addressed was sort of the issue of regulatory uncertainty. And in this dossier, we serve up some proof points might be a bit strong, but a catalog of regulatory, like documented regulatory enthusiasm for using these digital clinical measures. What progress are you seeing? Amy talked really eloquently about this. Is there a cultural shift around like better embracing collaboration with our colleagues, having a little bit less fear, uncertainty, and doubt around the sort of the spectre of our regulators?
Hi everyone, thanks for the question, Jen. So first of all, my name's Virginia Parks, and when I was in the tour, I was with Takeda as a digital strategist, but now I'm with Servier in the translational medicine group. So, and just briefly, that was my first participation in the tour. And you know, when I had some expectations, I thought I'd be able to share the knowledge that I'd accrued in that role, developing digital biomarkers, and to learn from others. And also, you know, knowing that there would be some creative energy that would sort of spur us along, and I wasn't disappointed. So I really enjoyed being involved. Thanks to everybody, and congratulations to Jen and Jean for meeting this launch and all the work that they've put into it. So back to the question, yeah. So the proof points, if you look at the material that Jean's put up on the board. So, you know, there's obviously, these are quite encouraging and inspirational, and you read them and you really hear the call for an increase in submissions with digital endpoints and digital components. And back to what Amy Abernathy was saying at the beginning, you know, there's this real kind of need or requirement for the regulators to work with industry to try to move digital endpoints and digital measures forward. So the general impression that I get, you know, working in industry is that, you know, digital measures have been evolving in pharma for some time from the bottom up. I think, Marissa, you mentioned that yourself a bit earlier, in a somewhat opportunistic way, right? So for change to occur from the top down, we need to show the potential for value. And I think we do that through this group, the work that's been done. And it's probably going to come via endpoint approvals and label claims. So this is going to take time, and regulatory colleagues are becoming more and more involved. And I think they're becoming increasingly involved as well as projects grow internally. And there's external influences such as participation in public-private collaborations, like the one I was involved in, IdeaFast, which is an IMI collaboration project looking at endpoints in fatigue and sleep. And that has a strong regulatory component, right? So there's some interactions with the EMA. And so all of this experience and the infusion back into industry and into sort of groups that are trying to develop internally within industry digital endpoints, it just helps with upskilling and adoption. So I do think that upskilling is an important aspect for adoption, and especially with our regulatory colleagues. So, you know, through the lens of what we already know about drug development, like I already said, a regulatory approved endpoint is equal to value. So that really came out through the conversations in this working group. And as practices are reinvented and redesigned, and more submissions come through and actually, you know, are approved, there's likely to be an acceleration in acceptance and in adoption. And actually, I should say, you know, from my experience, there's already some conditions such as movement disorders where endpoints or endpoint development in the clinical development plans are already baked in to clinical development plans. And I've got experience across a number of organizations to be able to say that. So you know, I think adoption is happening, and there's an expectation that this will be part of the submission package now, and regulators will be expecting that. So, and hopefully this will extend to other areas, obviously. So, so regulators are part of the conversation, and as end stakeholders, obviously, as Amy Abernathy said as well, and they have to be familiar with the process. So overall, I think that the progress is being made, and certainly this will certainly help.
Virginia, that's the theme of today. Progress is being made. I think it's a really positive stance we're in here, and really enjoyed working with you on this. Andy, my oftentimes co-conspirators in these sorts of projects, again, you and Priyanka sort of planted the seed that we tackle this. one of the things that you are very good at and you brought into this dossier is the importance of sort of storytelling. And in addition to the benefits matrix, we also have a number of different vignettes of these benefits sort of playing out in practice. First of all, intro yourself and then tell us a little bit about those vignettes that exist for people, and give us a call to action. I want to end with you this morning on this panel. You know, what do we do from here? How do we use all of this?
Bingo. Zoom bingo for the last one, but muted. So I'm Andy. I'm the co-founder of Elektra Labs, and I'm very excited everybody's here today because what are digital measures if not stories, right? These are the stories of people's lives and how they live. And I think the thing that I'm most excited about digital measures is that they're the stories generally of people at home in their natural environments rather than in other settings that might not, you know, exist for somebody when they're you know, being researched or like in a very specific, more clinical setting that's not as much of the lived experience. So the vignettes are something people ask us for all the time, which is like, how do these things actually work? And how did you, you know, like you can look at the endpoint library, which is awesome, but then how do you actually put these things into practice? So the thing I'm very proud of that Digital Medicine Society has done is they've tried every different version of this. There's slides, there's stories, there's an online website. There's so many different ways that you can get the message out. And I think the thing that's been most inspiring for me about this community in general is that DIME has created a really great opportunity for people to take seeds and then make them grow. So this whole playbook was originally like a 10-page blog post. We were like, yeah, we can totally do this in like a very short period of, yeah, everyone's like laughing here because you all got roped into that. But I think, if not to be like so hokey about this, but if you are frustrated about something and that you believe that the world can be different and it can be different and better for people, this is the community that will let you do that. So we're really excited that you're here. There's many resources. If you don't have the resource that you want, you can manifest it and somebody here will help you do that. So thank you for being part of it.
Andy, I'm not going to take any of the shine off those tremendous closing comments. All I'm going to do is thank you, thank David, Jeremy, Chris, Priyanka, Marissa, Virginia, other Chris, and Bray for just being extraordinary leaders on this. For folks on the line, we course corrected a couple of times with the dossier to make sure we landed it correctly for you. This was hard and thoughtful work by this team. So thank you, everyone. And